50,000 years ago, the galaxy's greatest civilization disappeared. They were advanced, invulnerable. They believed energy was the ultimate form of weapon. They were wrong.
They're back, and they haven't changed.
Gravity gas pedals, no energy signatures. They don't shoot light, they throw rocks. Very fast.
Fire!
When energy fails, mass remains. When high technology fails, physics enters the fray. And when the galaxy forgets how to fight, man reminds.
They're coming again. What do we do?
Build cannons. Very big cannons.
Welcome to galactic hell, where the old ways are your only chance of survival. And now, esteemed members of the Galactic Defense Council, droned council speaker Vex, their tentacles drooping with the slow-motion despair of someone who had long since lost the will to care. We move to item 47B on our agenda, the annual review of member species' military capabilities. Captain Brick Johnson slouched deeper into his seat inside the human delegation's booth. His uniform itched. His patience was on life support, and for at least the 1,000th time, he wondered why Earth had decided he, an actual field officer with the diplomatic subtlety of a wrecking ball, was the best choice for this annual spectacle of smugness. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't even good at pretending to be one. But apparently the Alliance's logic was, send someone who knows what weapons actually do. The amphitheater of New Geneva Station was a masterpiece of interspecies architecture, massive, ornate, and stuffed to capacity with representatives from over 200 member civilizations. They sat in their respective booths, most of them preening and polishing their pride, preparing to unveil their latest toys. It was, as always, less of a review and more of a bragging contest. Some species used the event to parade their newest advancements in energy manipulation. Others unveiled AI-targeted autocannons or self-regenerating drone swarms. And someone, every year, showed off a device that could make things explode more artistically. First presentation, Vex announced, managing to sound simultaneously bored and self-important. The Velian Confederation. There was a sudden gleam of motion from the central platform as Ambassador Pettering practically pranced into view, his iridescent scales catching the spotlight like a walking gemstone. He adjusted his custom-tailored spacesuit, something that probably cost more than Brick's annual salary, and flashed what he must have assumed was a dazzling smile. To Brick, it looked like a shark trying to sell you crypto. "My fellow sentients," Pettering began, his voice thick with performative warmth. "What if I told you we disrupted the very concept of defensive capabilities?" Brick mouthed the word disrupted with him and marked it off his Galactic Council buzzword bingo card. "Behold." Pettering held up what looked like an expensive wristwatch, the Pettering Personal Defense Suite, Mark 7. This revolutionary quantum-entangled energy matrix projects a defense field capable of dissipating any energy-based attack while simultaneously charging our next-generation plasma weapons for the perfect counter-strike. There were murmurs of impressed approval throughout the chamber. A few enthusiastic appendages clapped. Brick managed not to roll his eyes. Barely. Every year it went like this. Advanced species paraded their upgrades to already absurd energy weapons, gave TED Talks about how enlightened they were, and gave dirty looks to humanity for still flinging little chunks of metal at supersonic speeds. It had become something of a council joke, the humans and their primitive ballistic weapons, as if physics had an expiration date. And surely, Petering continued, now visibly basking in his own performance, some of our newer members might benefit from seeing this in action. He turned, locking eyes with Brick in the human delegation. Captain Johnson, perhaps you'd like to test our latest defense system with your ballistic weapons. The pause was deliberate. So was the smugness. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a setup. The kind meant to humiliate an entire species. Laughter rippled across the chamber. A Xenor 3 rows down actually fell out of their hover chair. Brick sighed and stood, adjusting his uniform with a sort of weary familiarity. "Ambassador Petring," he said, keeping his voice even, "with all due respect." "Oh, come now, Captain," Petring interrupted, practically giggling. "Surely you're not afraid to demonstrate your species' charming reliance on throwing little pieces of metal very fast." More laughter. Even Vex's tentacles curled slightly in amusement. "Fine," Brick said, drawing his standard-issue sidearm. "Standard safety protocols in effect, I assume." Of course," Petring said, waving a hand dismissively. "The demonstration area is fully contained, though I hardly think we'll need it for such antiquated technology." Brick stepped forward, his boots echoing in the silence that followed. He knew the dance, knew how this ended, and part of him, just a little, enjoyed it. Petering stood on the platform, arms spread, the shimmering shield device glowing faintly on his wrist. "Whenever you're ready, Captain, show us what your species considers cutting-edge defense technology." Brick gave a small smile. "Ambassador," he said, "I should mention, humanity doesn't actually consider this cutting edge. This is just what we give to officers who spend most of their time doing paperwork." He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed like an insult in the sanctity of the chamber. The round left the barrel, a dense physical projectile, no exotic energy signature, no glowy effects, and hit Petering's shield, which flared brilliantly, exactly as designed, for energy. The bullet ignored the light show entirely, sailing through and pinging off the containment field behind Petering with a loud metallic tink. Petering hadn't moved. His face hadn't caught up to the situation. The smug expression still lingered there, a few moments behind the reality of what had just happened. Brick holstered his weapon. "And that," he said, voice calm, "is why humans still use projectile weapons. Meeting minutes can show that I warned him." The chamber went completely silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then it erupted. 3 species started shouting over each other for technical clarification. Vex's tentacles shot up in alarm, trying to restore order. Petring stood in stunned silence, expression morphing from smug to horrified. Brick returned to his seat, pulled out his data pad, and checked off "Chaos erupts during weapons demonstration" on his bingo card. Some days he really loved his job. Vex was still trying to restore some semblance of order when Professor Blore burst through the chamber doors in a gelatinous panic, their amorphous body wobbling with either excitement, terror, or some unfortunate combination of the two. "Stop everything," Blore's translation module squeaked, their pitch rising with each word. "You're all in terrible danger." If the council chamber had been chaotic before, it now evolved into a new and previously unrecorded level of bedlam. Representatives began shouting in 12 different languages, 2 of which were non-linear. A Sarn diplomat reflexively activated a personal defense dome. Vex's tentacles tied themselves into a shape that looked suspiciously like a Mobius strip. "Professor Blore," Vex said, attempting to reassert control while simultaneously untangling themselves. "This is a closed session of the Defense Council. How did you even get in here?" "I solved the engravings," Blore continued, either ignoring or not hearing the question. Their translucent form had shifted to a disturbing shade of mauve. "The ancients weren't destroyed by a natural disaster. They were invaded." That cut through the noise. The council chamber fell into an uneasy hush. Even Pietring, who had been busy trying to pretend the ballistic demonstration hadn't just turned him into an interstellar meme, was now focused, his scales shifting into a muted blue-green of dawning dread. "The precursor civilization?" someone asked. "The one that vanished 50,000 years ago?" "Yes." Blore was already oozing toward the central platform, leaving a faint trail of anxiety sweat gel. "My team just finished decoding the final set of warning messages from the ruins on Epsilon 6. We've been translating them wrong for centuries." The room darkened as Blore interfaced with the chamber's holographic system. Ancient glyphs spiraled into the air, symbols that had long been considered religious or ceremonial. Blore's voice trembled with academic fervor. "These aren't prayers," they said. "They're technical specifications, warnings, instructions." Spinning faster, the symbols resolved into recognizable schematics, diagrams of strange ships, weapons, impact trajectories. "This is a warning," Blore whispered, "about something called kinetic penetrators." Brick sat up straighter. The phrase scratched at the back of his tactical memory like a splinter. "The precursors had energy shields too," Blore continued, their form rippling with urgency. "Advanced ones, better than anything we have today. But the invaders, they didn't use energy. They used mass, dense materials at extremely high velocities. Weapons that didn't care about your energy field, just how fast they could punch through it." "You mean like the primitive projectile weapons that just penetrated my supposedly impenetrable shield?" Pietring asked, his voice tight. His scales had shifted to a queasy yellow-green. "Exactly." Blore's form practically vibrated. "The precursors were defenseless. They'd optimized their entire defense doctrine around energy exchanges. When the enemy showed up with what was essentially a rock-throwing fetish, everything collapsed. The chamber erupted again, but not with laughter this time. Nervous murmurs. Worry. Heads turning toward the human delegation with expressions that were suddenly less amused and more concerned. "Oh, come on," a Zoran representative called out. "You expect us to believe the most advanced civilization in galactic history was defeated by what? Throwing rocks really fast?" Actually, Brick said, rising from his seat again, that's a pretty effective strategy. Energy shields are great against beams, pulses, plasma, light, but mass is mass. If you hit something hard enough, it doesn't matter how advanced your defenses are. It breaks. Thank you, Captain, Vex sighed, their voice fraying at the edges. But I hardly think... The chamber doors slammed open again. Lieutenant Max Rodriguez stumbled in, out of breath and wide-eyed. Judging by the sweat on his uniform and the wild look in his eye, he'd sprinted the length of the station and possibly the last 3 kilometers of corridor. "Captain," he gasped, "we've got a situation." The room quieted in an instant. Long-range sensors just picked up an unknown fleet entering the galactic periphery. No response to hails. No standard IFF. And their ships... He paused to catch his breath. They don't match anything in our database. Brick looked at the still spinning glyphs above Blor's platform. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "Unusually dense ships, low energy signatures, strange propulsion." Rodriguez blinked. "Yes, sir. How did you—" "Lucky guess." Brick turned toward Vex. "Speaker, I suggest we move up item 47C on the agenda, emergency response protocols, and maybe keep Professor Blor around. I think we're going to want an archaeologist." Petring, to his credit, didn't argue. His scales had settled into a muted panic purple. "For once," he muttered, "I agree with the human." Brick gave a grim smile. "Well, folks," he said, "looks like we're about to get a practical demonstration of why humanity never gave up on projectile weapons." He turned back to Rodriguez. "Lieutenant, tell the armory to break out the railguns." Rodriguez perked up like a kid on Christmas morning. "All of them, sir?" Brick nodded. "All of them." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez barked, already halfway back out the door. "We're going to need a lot of things that go very fast in one direction." The council chamber was once again in full chaos mode, but Brick barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the tactical hologram slowly forming above the platform. The shape of the alien fleet, the patterns they were falling into, the eerie calm before the inevitable. Somewhere out in the dark, a fleet that had once destroyed the most advanced civilization in galactic history had returned. And this time humanity was ready, or at the very least, better armed. The emergency session of the Defense Council had been running for 6 hours straight, which was about 5 hours and 55 minutes longer than Brick Johnson's patience usually lasted. In that time, the mysterious fleet had done precisely one thing: sit. They'd parked themselves just outside the Oort cloud of a nearby star system, staying stubbornly out of range of standard energy weapons, doing absolutely nothing except radiating quiet, terrifying menace. Perhaps, Petring had suggested, for approximately the 7th time, they should attempt peaceful contact again. "My new quantum harmonics translator is certified for over 7 million dialects," he said, as if that meant anything to the wall of silent ships looming at the edge of known space. "Your translator already tried that," Brick reminded him, rubbing his temples. "They responded by sending back what Professor Blor assures me is the mathematical equivalent of a middle finger." Blor, who had been obsessively cross-referencing the unknown ships against ancient precursor records, wobbled with enthusiasm. The similarity is uncanny. Mass readings, energy signatures, identical. Even their position just beyond weapons range matches the original attack patterns recorded on Epsilon 6. About that, Rodriguez interrupted, bouncing slightly on his heels, the way a predator vibrates before pouncing. I've been running some numbers. Their ships might be out of range for energy weapons, but our railguns, with the new magnetic acceleration coils, absolutely not. Pettering flushed a defensive shade of crimson. We are not going to start an interstellar incident by firing primitive projectiles at a fleet that hasn't attacked us. Even if it's the same fleet that wiped out an entire civilization? Brick asked mildly. We don't know that for certain, Vex interjected, their tentacles now wrapped around what appeared to be their fifth cup of stimulant fluid. And even if it is the same fleet, that was 50,000 years ago. Perhaps they've evolved. As if summoned by cosmic irony, the main chamber display suddenly flared to life. Incoming transmission. No language, no symbols, just math. Specifically, math arranged in such a way that every AI in the room flagged it as both profanity and a war declaration. Well, Pettering said after a long moment, his scales shifting to a sort of resigned yellow. I suppose that answers that. The ships began to move. It wasn't flight in the traditional sense. They fell, using gravity wells like stepping stones, riding space-time in smooth, calculated arcs, elegant, efficient, terrifying. They're charging weapons, Rodriguez called out. His tactical display lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Energy readings are... Wait, that can't be right. Brick didn't even look away. Let me guess, no energy readings at all. Rodriguez stared at the console. Exactly. It's like they're not... Oh, hell. They're using kinetics. Really, really big kinetics. The first shot from the alien fleet arrived in a blur of relativistic violence. A slug of refined metal, roughly the size of a small office building, screamed across space and punched through 3 layers of the most advanced shielding the Council had ever developed. Then it hit a monitoring station. The monitoring station ceased to exist. It didn't explode. It evaporated. The chamber erupted. Again. Vex's tentacles tied themselves into something that may have proven string theory. Petring's scales cycled through colors so fast they became a kind of biological rave. Blore was bouncing with a level of historical glee that was deeply inappropriate for the current level of threat. It's just like the record said, they squealed. Weapons that completely ignored energy shields. This is a once-in-a-million-year academic opportunity. We're all going to die, someone muttered. We are not going to die, Brick said, standing. Rodriguez, remember those railgun calculations? Rodriguez's grin could have melted titanium. Yes, sir. I took the liberty of loading our experimental super-heavy penetrators. They're not quite as fast as the alien rounds, but with the new magnetic acceleration, Lieutenant? Yes, sir. Less talking, more shooting. Yes, sir. What followed was a masterclass in the universal language of mass times acceleration. The alien fleet, apparently expecting another rollover victory, had arranged itself in a staggered, classic offensive wedge. It was a textbook perfect assault formation, Against energy weapons, against hyper-accelerated tungsten rods, it was a series of conveniently grouped targets. The first volley from Rodriguez's modified rail platforms struck with terrifying precision. 3 enemy vessels were turned into expanding clouds of vaporized metal. The second wave cut through the center of the formation. The third sent half their flank into retreat. The aliens tried to return fire. Their own kinetic weapons were brutal, accurate, and useless against platforms that weren't where the aliens thought they'd be. Human designs had factored in recoil, dodging, and shifting fields of fire. The aliens were shooting at where their enemies should have been. "Ha!" Rodriguez cried. "That's what you get for showing up to a kinetic fight with last millennium's tactics." "Lieutenant," Brick said, "please maintain professional decorum while committing acts of extreme violence." "Sorry, sir. Target neutralized with extreme prejudice, sir." The alien fleet hesitated, then scattered. They fell away from the battlefield with the same unsettling grace they'd arrived with, pulling away into the dark, retreating along gravity arcs, too efficient to be anything but pre-calculated. They hadn't come for a fight. They'd come for a massacre, and now they were running. "Well," Vex said into the stunned silence, their tentacles slowly untangling, "I believe this session has been informative." "Indeed," Petring agreed, his scales finally settling into a shade best described as embarrassed acceptance. "Perhaps we should revisit our previous stance on the efficacy of kinetic weapons." "Fantastic idea," Brick said, glancing toward Rodriguez, who was lovingly patting the tactical console like it was a beloved pet. "But first, maybe we should talk about what we're going to do when they come back." "What makes you so sure they will?" Vex asked. "Because," Brick said with a tight smile, "if there's one thing humans understand, it's the mindset of someone who shows up expecting an easy victory and gets punched in the teeth instead." He folded his arms. "They take it personally." "How long do we have?" Petring asked, his tone losing its smug edge. Rodriguez straightened, practically bouncing. "Long enough to start mass-producing railguns?" "Lieutenant, sorry, sir. Long enough to begin a measured and appropriate military response to a clear and present danger, sir." Brick sighed. It was going to be a very long week, but at least this time they knew what they were up against. And even better, they already knew how to hit it hard. 3 months. That's how long it had taken to reshape the galaxy's military doctrine. 3 months of frantic engineering, sleepless nights, and political screaming matches that bordered on thermonuclear. Of rushed alliances, emergency funding bills, and the frantic birth of a new kind of war. And now Captain Brick Johnson stood in the command center of New Geneva Station, watching it all come online. The largest kinetic defense grid in the known galaxy stretched silently across the system like a spiderweb of implied violence. Dozens of orbital platforms floated in carefully plotted positions. Cold, still, beautiful in the way a minefield is beautiful when you know which way to walk. Each one armed with railguns the size of small skyscrapers, their targeting systems humming with barely restrained anticipation. "They're beautiful," Rodriguez whispered, misty-eyed and reverent. Brick glanced over. "Lieutenant, Sorry, sir, I meant to say the interlocking layers of tactical coverage provide a robust and professionally calibrated defense matrix, sir. Brick almost smiled. Petring stood nearby, visibly sweating despite the station's regulated climate control. His scales had been stuck in a sort of nervous mauve all week. Are we absolutely certain they're coming back? Perhaps we made our point. Perhaps they've decided it's not worth the effort. As if waiting for a cue, the long-range sensors flared to life. The room fell into sudden silence. They were back. Ships began blinking into the edge of the system like dark stars, dense and silent, gravity-riding monstrosities. Just like last time. Only this time, they weren't hesitating. Formation matches the precursor invasion records, Blore announced, their body rippling with scholarly terror. Identical attack vectors. They haven't changed anything. How unfortunate for them, Rodriguez muttered, fingers already dancing across targeting consoles. Hold, Brick said. Rodriguez froze mid-command. Sir? Let's see if they learned anything. The aliens moved into formation. Textbook, precise, predictable. Then came the signal. Not language, not words, just math. A proof delivered with malicious certainty. A declaration of dominance wrapped in ancient equations. Well, Petring said softly, I suppose that answers that. Brick nodded once. Lieutenant? Sir. Show them why humans have a saying about bringing knives to gunfights. The first salvo from the orbital platforms hit like a symphony composed entirely in the key of obliteration. 3 of the largest enemy ships disintegrated in a blaze of metal and fire. The second barrage sliced clean through their flanks. The third blew the heart out of their formation. The galaxy's most ancient threat had walked into a trap built by a species that had never stopped believing in the power of throwing very heavy things very fast. They didn't stand a chance. The aliens responded, but it was chaos. No coordinated patterns, no graceful arcs, just desperation. Their shots, designed for targets that used to sit still and shimmer under energy shields, went wide. The fixed platforms, built like armored fortresses, shrugged them off. Rodriguez cackled as another alien vessel erupted into shrapnel. That's what you get for showing up with 50,000-year-old tactics. Lieutenant, Brick said. Sorry, sir. Target experiencing rapid, unplanned disassembly due to superior kinetic response, sir. By the third wave, the aliens were scattering. Whatever had brought them back, their ancient doctrine, their arrogance, their assumption that nothing could challenge them, was now unraveling in real time. They're retreating, Petring observed, his scales slowly shifting towards something that looked like cautious awe. And much faster than last time, Vex added, blinking at the displays. It seems they've learned one thing: fear. They've just run into something they weren't prepared for, Blore said, vibrating with excitement. For the first time in recorded history, someone pushed back. Brick folded his arms. Everyone else spent millennia trying to be advanced. We just stayed practical. Rodriguez was already pulling up telemetry on several disabled alien ships, still tumbling through space. Sir, some of their vessels are intact enough for study. Should we send a recovery team? Absolutely not, Vex snapped. Protocol for first contact. states that we should carefully study potential threats to galactic civilization, Brick interrupted smoothly. Besides, Lieutenant Rodriguez might explode if we don't let him. Rodriguez was already halfway out of his chair. I will maintain professional decorum while examining alien weapons systems. And if something explodes, it'll be entirely for research purposes, sir. Vex made a noise that could only be described as a tentacle-based sigh. The battle was over. The council chamber was still in stunned silence, save for the occasional quiet murmur of a species reevaluating several centuries' worth of smug assumptions. We've confirmed it, Petring said in the post-battle session. They are the ones who destroyed the precursors, their ships, their tactics, their technology. It all matches. They were once unstoppable. Rodriguez leaned toward Brick. Were being the key word. Petring ignored him. They were designed to fight one kind of war. They never imagined anything else would work. We built something they couldn't even conceptualize. Because no one ever told humans they weren't allowed to use the old ways, Brick said. We just kept throwing rocks. Bigger ones. The diplomatic implications are concerning, Vex murmured. They'll return with new strategies. Next time they'll expect kinetic weapons. They can expect whatever they want, Brick replied. We'll be ready. Rodriguez brought up a new display. The Mark II defense grid, rotating platforms, magnetic lattice work, acceleration coils that turned mass into vengeance. I call it the super heavy antimatter-assisted kinetic kill vehicle, they said, positively glowing. It's beautiful. Petring stared in mute horror. That's a war crime waiting to happen. Only if we use it first, Brick said. Which we won't. Probably. This is a new doctrine, Blore said, awed. A complete shift in military thinking. Future civilizations will study this moment for millennia. Assuming, Vex said dryly, we survive that long. We will, Brick replied, because this time we're not alone. This time we're all building together. The council nodded, some reluctantly, some with newfound respect. Well then, Vex said, next year's defense summit should be interesting. Oh yes, Brick said, watching Rodriguez gleefully begin explaining the physics of nuclear pulse propulsion to a room of increasingly pale ambassadors. And we'll need new bingo cards. Something tells me ancient species returns and galactic doctrine collapse are going to be regular squares from now on. He turned back to the screen, to the stars, to the dark where the enemy had fled. They'd be back. But so would humanity. And this time they wouldn't be fighting alone. After all, there was a reason they'd never given up on throwing rocks really, really fast at their problems. Sometimes the old ways weren't just the best ways. Sometimes they were the only ones that worked.